Questions to the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Liz Twist.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Steve Baker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has a long-standing tradition of protecting rights and liberties. The decision to leave the European Union does not and will not change that. The EU Withdrawal Bill retains the rights, standards and protections derived from EU legislation and treaties as they exist immediately before our departure from the EU. That will ensure that, so far as practical, all rights will apply as they did before exit. I have no doubts about the abilities of this House to uphold our rights, standards and protections after we leave the EU.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the Prime Minister's insistence that the Government has committed not to roll back workers' rights, can the Secretary of State explain why Conservative MPs voted against yesterday's Lord's amendment to protect employment, equality, health and safety, consumer and environmental rights and standards after Brexit?
Good question. Well, Minister Baker.
Mr. Speaker, our commitment to workers' rights is unwavering, but on the specific points that she has raised, the fact of the matter is that that amendment, if it had been carried forward, would have severely damaged our capacity to have a functioning statute book as we left the European Union.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it right that we in this country are not able to exercise some of the rights that the people would wish us to exercise? For example, the freedom to be able to transport live animals for slaughter is a freedom which we would prefer not to have. And as soon as we leave the European Union, we'll be able to take control of those things for ourselves.
Minister.
Speaker, my honourable friend raises a point on which I'm sure many of us have received correspondence, and I look forward to the day when it is within the sphere of the powers of this House to change those rules.
Stephen Hepburn.
Isn't it right that we have a customs union that protects workers' rights and the right to allow state aid and to allow public ownership, and also the right to be able to ban outsourcing and competitive tendering if the government should wish to do so?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if you will allow me, I'd just like to pay tribute to the honourable gentleman's capacity to use parliamentary procedure to bring an enormous range of issues into his question. I suggest that he might wish to call an adjournment debate if he feels that he has not had sufficient opportunity during the passage of the withdrawal bill to debate all of the issues which he raises.
In deference to the honour of the honourable gentleman, I would simply point out that rights, standards and protections do amount to a pretty broad category, and the honourable gentleman has behaved, as usual, in a perfectly orderly, if innovative manner. Mr. David T.C. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend agree with me that one of the most fundamental rights we have in this country is to decide who determines our legislation and where that legislation comes from, and that is exactly the right that we're protecting when we listen to what the people have told us and withdraw from the European Union?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. The fundamental political right is that power should derive from the consent of the governed, and it is in leaving the European Union that we will re-establish that consent on a basis which has been traditionally understood, which is that it is this Parliament which will determine the laws of the United Kingdom.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have said that the loss of the Charter will lead to a significant weakening of the current system of human rights protections in the United Kingdom. Given that that's the advice of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, what specific steps is the Minister taking to prevent the loss of human rights protections following upon the loss of the Charter of Fundamental Rights?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we disagree with them, and the Charter of Fundamental Rights is only one element of the UK's human rights architecture. Most of the rights protected in the Charter are also protected in domestic law by the Common Law, the Human Rights Act or other domestic legislation. And the fact of the matter, which the honourable lady doesn't seem to wish to accept, is that this House has voted repeatedly on this very question.
Dr. David Drew.
Mr. Speaker, but would the Minister accept that animal welfare and environmental protection are so important to British agriculture, and what guarantees will the government put in place to make sure there is no diminution? Don't take my word for that, take the word of the NFU.
Minister Baker.
Mr. Speaker, we've had wide-ranging debates about animals and animal rights, and of course he will know that this is a subject of continuing interest for the government. The government has been tabling amendments in relation to environmental protections. The Secretary of State for Agriculture has brought forward a range of proposals in relation to animal rights. I look forward to us carrying those forward.
Mr Linden, you're now much preoccupied with consulting your electronic device, but if you're still interested in contributing to our proceedings, let's hear you.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State's departmental colleague Lord Callanan wants to, in a quote, scrap the Working Time Directive, the Agency Workers Directive, the Pregnant Workers Directive and all other barriers to actually employing people. So which one does the Secretary of State think should happen first?
Well, Mr Speaker, the position of the Government is that the UK firmly believes in strong labour protections while also embracing the opportunities arising from a changing world of work. We do not need to stay aligned with the EU to have strong protections for workers, and a key tenet of this Government's industrial strategy is to continually improve labour standards in domestic legislation.
Mr Speaker.
Minister Robin Walker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Secretary of State and I have regular discussions with ministerial colleagues on how to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. The joint report in December made clear that the UK is committed to avoiding any physical infrastructure or related checks and controls. And of course, this House, by passing Lord's Amendment 25, has reiterated that position.
Karen Smith.
Grateful for that reply, but doesn't the Minister's reassurance fly in the face of some of the facts on the ground? The Chief Constable of Northern Ireland has now stalled the sale of 3 police stations on the border and submitted a business case for up to 300 officers. Has he and his Cabinet colleagues discussed this proposal, and will they be supporting it?
Minister Walker.
The UK Government could not have been clearer about our commitment to ensuring no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And while the funding for settlement for the PSNI is a devolved matter for the Northern Ireland administration, which we all want to see restored as soon as possible, the UK Government does not intend to allocate any resources in relation to policing a hard border after our exit from the EU, furtherance of any steps that would contradict or undermine the clear commitments we've made.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Were we to leave without an agreement, we wouldn't put a border there. So if anyone wants one, they'd have to put it there, wouldn't they?
Minister.
My honourable friend raises an interesting point, but of course it is our intention to leave with an agreement, and we've been very clear that the first priority is to secure that absence of a hard border for the future relationship between the UK and the EU.
Mr Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our government, the Dublin government and Brussels have all said they don't want a hard border. Is there an understanding that the Minister has from the EU side that a hard border, whoever might want it, would be totally impossible to police because of the hundreds of crossing points that everyone in Northern Ireland would use, even if someone tried to implicate a hard border on the ground?
Well, the honourable gentleman speaks with considerable experience and knowledge of the issue. I think he's absolutely right, and I think it's why, from what I have seen in the conversations that I've had, London, Dublin, Belfast and Brussels have all been clear about the need to avoid the creation of a hard border.
Mr Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When we talk about the Northern Ireland border, aren't we just putting the cart before the horse? Surely we need to focus on the UK-EU customs arrangements so we know exactly where we are. We buy 850,000 German cars every year, £3 billion worth of flowers and bulbs from the Dutch, and irrespective of what Wetherspoons did yesterday, we still drink more champagne than the French and will continue to do so.
It's coming on the question that they're not...
My honourable friend is right about the advantages of ensuring frictionless trade between the UK and the EU, and that is the government's policy.
Ms Valencoka.
Wouldn't this Parliament and the whole of their island of Ireland be reassured about the things the Minister is saying about a border if the government had allowed more time for people in this House to discuss these hugely serious issues? What's the government going to do about that? And is he going to discuss that with his Cabinet colleagues about how we discuss these issues in this Parliament rather than listen to the waffle of the Minister?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman that I seem to remember spending quite a lot of time discussing this issue at committee stage, including being harangued by him to ensure that there was a specific reference to the Belfast Agreement in the bill. Thanks to the changes we've made and the acceptance of Lord's Amendment 25, there is now such a specific reference. I'm sure he will welcome that.
Jenny Chapman.
Mr Speaker, can I just remind members that the Prime Minister said that we are leaving and it is our responsibility to find a solution to the Northern Ireland border. On Tuesday, the Government did accept the Patten Amendment and rightly committed us to no controls, no checks, no infrastructure on the border in Northern Ireland. But how on earth can the Government ensure that this will happen without the UK, Northern Ireland, Ireland and the EU being in, as a minimum, a customs union?
Minister.
Well, as the Honourable Lady knows, we are committed to ensuring that there are customs arrangements that allow for no physical infrastructure at the border. As she also knows, we have put forward our own proposal to a backstop in the EU negotiations, and that is an important element of that, but we want to secure this through the future relationship between the UK and the EU.
Killen.
Question 3, Mr Speaker.
Eade. Minister Walker.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 3 and 16 together. The Secretary of State and I regularly discuss exit issues with Cabinet and ministerial colleagues, including customs. The Prime Minister is clear that we're working towards a customs solution that keeps trade with the EU as frictionless as possible, avoids a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and establishes an independent trade policy.
Killen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister tell us how many times the Government's 2 working groups on future customs arrangements have met, and how close are they to finally reaching a conclusion between the Government's 2 unworkable and undesirable customs options?
I'd say to the gentleman that those working groups are meeting regularly to advance the work on both of the options, and as agreed yesterday, the Government will provide by the 31st of October a statement to Parliament on the steps taken to negotiate a customs arrangement with the EU.
Jill Furness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with the President of the CBI, who warned yesterday that if we do not have a customs union, there are sectors of manufacturing society in the UK which risk becoming extinct?
No, I agree with the Conservative and Labour manifestos that said we should be leaving the customs union and we should be ensuring that we have an independent trade policy. But we also want to deliver the frictionless trades that businesses up and down our country need.
Given Foster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the discussions with the European Union, has the Government made clear that we would not tolerate a solution that put the customs border down the Irish Sea, or, for that matter, between England and Scotland, as some others want to do?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. We've made that abundantly clear, and the Prime Minister has been very clear that no UK Prime Minister could accept such a solution.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yesterday I had the pleasure to meet with the Chamber of Commerce from Portugal. And whilst, of course, they were sorry to see us leaving the European Union, their biggest concern with regard to the customs union was actually how long it was taking for the entire process to be put together. So, can I ask the Minister, I should hasten to add that we then had a potted history about how Parliament works, sadly. Can I ask the Minister to ensure that whatever comes through this, that we send a message to the Portuguese that they are absolutely with us and trading with us in the future?
Absolutely. My friend makes an important point. Portugal is our oldest ally in the world. In fact, I think the longest standing alliance in the world is between England and Portugal. We want to ensure that the trade between us can continue to flourish, as we do, the trade between the UK and many other EU member states.
Patrick Grady.
Mr Speaker, does the Minister think that the sight of ministers and whips negotiating in real time their position on the customs union, either from the dispatch box on the benches, helps or hinders the UK's negotiating position with the rest of the European Union?
I'd say to the honourable gentleman that the Government is determined to present the right answer on customs to make sure that we have the frictionless trade we all want to see between the UK and the EU. And the sight of the SNP abandoning their parliamentary responsibilities is perhaps not one that encourages confidence from anyone.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Director General of the CBI warned that opportunities are limited and are vastly outweighed by the costs that will be incurred if the UK's rules change so much that it reduces smooth access to the EU's market. Unquote. Why then did the Government vote against Labour's amendment for a new relationship with the single market based on shared regulations and common standards?
Half the Labour Party seem to be voting against Labour's amendments nowadays. But I'd say to the honourable lady that we meet regularly with the CBI, with different business groups up and down the country. They are all very clear on the benefits of frictionless trade, and that is the policy of the Government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The media inevitably focused on the personalities involved in the Cabinet row over a customs backstop last week, but it's the detail of that policy that really matters. So I'd like to ask the Minister a very simple question. Are we to take from the fact that the Secretary of State and his other 2 colleagues are still in post that the Government's position is not to accept, under any circumstances, a customs backstop that is not time-limited?
The Prime Minister has been clear that the backstop arrangements would be time-limited, but I think I say to the honourable gentleman that the fact that our entire ministerial team is in post is a sign that our party is united, unlike the Labour Party, which has now had 100 resignations from its front bench or PPSs.
Matthew Pennicook.
Not really an answer, Mr. Speaker. Last week's backstop paper only dealt with customs. But we know that a solution to the Irish border issue requires agreement on far more than that. It requires full regulatory alignment on goods to facilitate all aspects of North-South cooperation. Does the Minister accept that? And will the Government be making the case for full regulatory alignment in goods in future discussions with the EU?
Well, as the gentleman will know if he's looked at the detail of the joint report, what we are talking about is alignment in those areas necessary for the functioning of the border and ensuring that there is no hard border. That doesn't mean full regulatory alignment across all areas. It means looking at specific areas relating to agriculture and industrial goods that could otherwise result in checks at the border. And we were clear in our presentations to the EU that there is further discussion to be had on this.
Before, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 4, 7 and 14 together. We reached agreement on more than three-quarters of the legal text of the withdrawal agreement, and in particular locking down full chapters on citizens' rights, implementation period and financial settlement. We're continuing to build on the progress from March. Technical talks have continued, and we're focusing on negotiating the right future relationship. These conversations are now well underway with detailed discussions on future economic and future security partnerships. In my latest meeting with Michel Barnier on Monday, we discussed a range of issues from questions of the Northern Ireland Protocol, as just been discussed here, to product standards and market access, in what was a very productive and positive discussion. We'll continue to work hard and at pace and set out further detail in the Government White Paper in due course.
Matt Warman.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents voted more than any others in the country to leave the European Union. Over the last couple of days, this House has worked hard to deliver on that, and I know they will be grateful for all his work. Does he agree with me that there is no record anywhere in the world of an international negotiation where a parliament in place of government has delivered a successful micromanaged outcome? Well, my honourable friend is exactly right. As we made clear during the debate this week on consideration of Lord's amendments to the EU withdrawal bill, we cannot accept amendments that allow Parliament to instruct government on what steps it should take in international negotiation, as that undermines one of my three tests, the three tests I put. And such a move would actually be constitutionally unprecedented. The current constitutional arrangements have served this country well for hundreds of years, over thousands of treaties. And I have to say those who have argued for something different did not argue for the House of Commons to negotiate directly our accession to the European Union, or indeed the Lisbon Treaty, or the Amsterdam Treaty, or the Maastricht Treaty. And so it's rather odd they make such an argument now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the Lord's amendments being rejected by this House on the EEA and the Customs Union, can he now head to Brussels with renewed vigour to support many of my constituents who voted for Brexit and now want the government to get on and deliver the result?
Secretary of State.
Well, I would hope my vigour does not need renewal, but I will take his wishes as meant, I'm sure. We did have a constructive debate in both chambers of the House, and I'm pleased that we're now in the final stages of the bill. This crucial piece of legislation is designed to deliver continuity of law and after exit, and ensures that we're ready for day one with this functioning statute book, which will give certainty to both individuals and business. And we'll build on the hard work at home and in Brussels and continue to work towards a withdrawal agreement and future framework in October.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I concur with the comments of my Cornish colleague that the people of my constituency simply now want the government to get on and deliver the Brexit that they voted for? But will he confirm that this government's position remains to take back control of our borders, and will he therefore resist all calls for us to join the EEA, which would precipitate continued freedom of movement and not deliver what the majority of people voted for?
Stay.
Yes, as my right honourable friend the Solicitor General stated in yesterday's debate on the Lord's EEA amendment, continuing to participate in the EEA agreement beyond the implementation period means accepting all four freedoms of the single market, including free movement of people. And both parties both main parties in the last election were clearly saying they were not going to accept that. Now, it's clear, therefore, that continuing to participate in the EEA agreement beyond the implementation period would not deliver control of our borders or our laws as the British people voted for. The point made by a number of Labour MPs in yesterday's debate, and I have to say, as she's not here, I don't often compliment the member for Don Valley. I made one of the best speeches of the day on exactly that subject. Our proposals are designed to deliver the best access to the European market, consistent with taking back control of our laws and borders, and that's what we will do.
Thank you
very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The government's proposal for a backstop in Northern Ireland did not include an approach on regulatory standards, which is presumably one reason why Michel Barnier, in rejecting it, said it would lead to a hard border. Does the government now intend to submit a revised proposal to the EU negotiators before the June European Council?
Well, the right honourable gentleman is uncharacteristically inaccurate in his comment, because Michel Barnier did not reject our proposal. He said in a tweet after his press conference that he would be discussing it with us, which he did on Monday.
A meaningful voice for Parliament in the Brexit deal. But does the Secretary of State recognise that the businesses that we represent are crying out for some sort of clarity so that they can deliver on the investment which drives jobs in my constituency? When will he deliver that clarity?
Well, the Honourable Lady is wrong again. I mean, the government has given, what, I think 250 hours of debate on this bill alone, probably a dozen other pieces of primary legislation, the withdrawal agreement and implementation bill later this year. There's a huge range of areas where Parliament has its say and will have its say. And then to come to the point of investment, business investment, just to take high-tech investment alone, the most important for our future in many ways, we in this country in the last year had 3 times the level of technological investment in the UK of any European country, indeed as much as the next 3 put together.
Blomfield.
Mr. Speaker, political leadership of the negotiations is clearly key to their success. But in a response to a question I tabled, the Honourable Member for Wickham informed me that until last Monday, the Secretary of State had only met with Michel Barnier twice since December, once in February and once at a press conference in March. 2 meetings in 6 critical months. So can the Secretary of State explain his absence? Is it because paralysis in the Cabinet leaves him with nothing to say? Or is it simply because he's been sidelined by officials closer to the Prime Minister?
Isn't it wonderful having the Labour Party, of all people, trying to accuse us? I'm looking at Mr. Shearman. Don't worry. The Labour Party, of all people. I just read a tweet this morning where the Labour Whip's office was celebrating the fact that only 75 Labour members rebelled against their motion yesterday.
There's been a grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say, first of all, I'm slightly pleasantly surprised to see the Secretary of State still in his place. I suspect... Well, I do suspect, Mr. Speaker, that if I'm surprised to see him still in his place, that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister are significantly more surprised. But particularly as the negotiations go on to look at our future and long-term relationship with Europe, they will inevitably impinge significantly on matters that are properly and constitutionally devolved to the 3 devolved nations of this Union. This week, we saw the government force through without a debate provisions that will allow ministers unilaterally to remove and to change the powers of those devolved nations. Can the Secretary of State tell us what assurances should the people in those devolved nations take that our interests will not be sold out during the next stage of the negotiation?
Firstly, might I say, Mr. Speaker, that I'm touched that he's pleasantly surprised that I'm still here. And I'm very pleasantly surprised to see so many of his colleagues with him today. On the important substantive question, the government came up with a number of proposals during the course of the bill in which they sought to arrange the mechanism by which powers are passed from the European Union through to the devolved administrations. It was and came up with proposals which were welcomed by the Welsh administration, but not by the Scots one. Nevertheless, we are continuing in our discussions with them to endeavour to come to an agreement. And whilst we're doing the work for the White Paper, we're also talking to them about the policy elements in that too, so they can have input.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I remind the Secretary of State once again that it was not the Scottish Government that refused the legislative consent motion, it was the elected Parliament of Scotland. 4 out of 5 parties agreed that the Government's actions were unacceptable. But could I ask the Secretary of State to confirm that as the legislation and as the government's intentions currently stand, it would be perfectly possible for the government to return from Brussels with a deal that substantially damaged the interests of the 3 devolved nations of this union, and that the only option members of Parliament from those nations would have would be to accept that sellout or to accept a car crash no deal. That is the government's intentions now, isn't it?
Yeah. I've made very clear from the beginning of the negotiation process and the policy creation process that we treat the interests of every nation in the United Kingdom extremely seriously and will defend them to the utmost of our ability. There will be a statement later, I think, from the Scottish Secretary on the Salt Convention.
Call him again.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Suella Braverman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department for Exiting the EU is working with all departments at both ministerial and official level to ensure that our preparations for exit from and new partnership with the EU are on track. We are committed to seeking the best possible deal for the United Kingdom, one that works for all of the regions of the country, including the North West, and I was delighted to visit the region earlier this month and meet with local businesses to discuss their views on Brexit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the very positive work being done by organisations like the St Helens Chamber of Commerce, the latest polling shows that confidence amongst businesses in the North West fell by 22 points to just 33%. Now, I'm intrigued to know what the Minister attributes that to. Is it the fact that this government's chaotic and shambolic handling of negotiations means that there's a real anxiety amongst businesses that we're going to crash out of the single market with no deal?
Yeah. Well, I very strongly disagree with his analysis. During my visit to the North West, I was pleased to meet with thriving businesses that are looking forward to the economic opportunities flowing from Brexit, such as trading with an expanded global marketplace. And together with huge investment in the North West, such as the Mersey Gateway Bridge and the Northern Hub in Manchester, the Port of Liverpool, for example, stands to potentially act as an expanded gateway for global trade. This week's ONS figures, trade figures, show that exports are rising by 7% to the end of April, faster than imports. That's good news for ports like Liverpool, good news for the North West region, and good news for the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as the North West, all regions in the UK are important to the Union, including the devolved nations. So therefore, can my honourable friend confirm that no area will be treated unfairly when we leave the EU?
Absolutely. The integrity of the United Kingdom is paramount as we go through these negotiations. And what I'm very encouraged by is the government's commitment to securing a unique and mutually beneficial free trade agreement with the European Union, which supports our businesses, our jobs and our economy.
Yes. Mr. Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given all the analyses show that the Scottish economy would fall by 2.9% in GDP if we took the least worst scenario of the single market and the customs union when we leave the EU, what is the GDP figure that the government are working towards with their current negotiating position?
Well, let's just look globally that we have an economy which has got increased output. That's the CBI's figures themselves. We've got the OECD upgrading growth forecast for this year and next, and we've got the lowest net borrowing in over a decade. That's a very different picture to the predictions that were made this time 2 years ago. Let's base it on facts, not scaremongering about the future.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take questions 6, 8 and 9 together. We've been clear that the UK will be leaving the EU's customs union and single market in March 2019. Only by leaving the customs union and establishing a new and ambitious customs arrangement with the EU will we be able to forge new trade relationships with our partners around the world. If the UK were to remain in the customs union, we would be unable to implement our own trade deals or to set our own tariffs. That wouldn't give us control over our trade policy, and it wouldn't be respecting the referendum result.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any policy whereby Britain leaves the European Union but remains in the customs union would mean surrendering our trade policy to a third party, and would mean that we were required to open our markets to other countries without guaranteed reciprocal access to theirs. Would my honourable friend agree with me that this is a position that no independent, self-respecting nation could tolerate?
I agree with my honourable friend. A customs union creates an asymmetrical relationship, and Turkey is an example of a country in a customs union with the EU, but not in the customs union with the EU. And the effect that has is that if the EU are to sign a free trade agreement with a third country, say the US or Canada, those goods from the US or Canada are able to enter Turkey tariff-free, but Turkish goods still face a tariff barrier in Canada or America, which puts Turkish businesses and exporters at a significant disadvantage. With free trade as the big prize from Brexit, Labour's support for a customs union makes no sense at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you're a cider drinker, but say the word Somerset and you inevitably think of cider. And last week I held an event for the trade on the cider industry, inviting all the cider makers from Somerset. And there was a great deal of positivity, and there's a great deal of emphasis on the fact that we could grow on the world market when we leave Europe. Would my right honourable friend agree that yesterday's decision will help us negotiate unfettered, and that will benefit our southwest industries in this respect?
I do agree with my honourable friend. Mr. Speaker, cider is a delicious drink. You may well agree, and if I may be so bold, you may have had many a joyous occasion, maybe in your teenage or university days like myself, where the memories are enhanced precisely because of the consumption of cider. So I am very pleased that companies, particularly in her constituency, in her region, have got a can-do attitude to Brexit and are looking forward to the increased global trading opportunities. And Brexit presents those opportunities, especially for the food and drink industry.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I have been meeting with elected representatives from places as far apart as Wellington to Washington, they are very keen to do trade deals with the United Kingdom post-Brexit. Can I have confirmation that that wouldn't be possible if we remain part of the customs union?
Minister.
Yes. Remaining in a customs union or the customs union with the EU would not be compatible with having a meaningful independent trade policy. It would mean that we would have less control than we have now over our trading relationships with other countries. Neither Leave nor Remain voters would want that.
Sorry. But the honourable lady has given an extremely clear and helpful answer. But the problem is we've got a lot of questions to get through, and I want to accommodate colleagues. So if all ministers could be brief, that would be great. Phil Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Car manufacturing in this country is world-leading, and the President of the CBI has said that if we leave the customs union, it will be extinct. What contingencies does the government have to replace the 800,000 jobs affected, including the 30,000 jobs in the north-east of England?
Minister.
Well, I disagree with his description there. The automotive sector is one of our great success stories, and the government will continue to support it. And we've only just heard in April that Vauxhall has announced an investment of over £100 million in its plant in the UK to build the next generation of Vivaro vans. And so we are seeing more and more success in the sector, and we've got to support that, and that will be an ambition of our future trade agreement with the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The motor sector, but also the food sector, have ruled that expressed concern that rules of origin in the supply chain could have a real impact post-Brexit if we're not part of a customs union. What approach is the department taking? Are they looking at a broader definition of local origin, or how else will they help those sectors deal with rules of origin post-Brexit?
Well, the honourable lady is right to highlight the issue of rules of origin when it comes to this sector, and we want to ensure that we ensure as limited as friction as possible, a tariff-free arrangement on goods, so that we have and ensure the integrated supply chains that are vital to the success of this sector.
Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister comment on the Foreign Secretary's analysis that the government's EU negotiations are heading for meltdown? And is this not just another example of the chaos and division at the heart of government?
Minister Braverman.
I think her interpretation is incorrect. The government is making... let's just look at the progress that the government's made. we've agreed an implementation period. We have, led by the Prime Minister, we've secured agreement in December on EU citizens, and we are now at the phase of talking about the exciting future relationship with the European Union. And I'm looking forward to the opportunities and the success that's going to be led by this government, not the predictions of failure.
Thank you. Mr David Jones.
Question 10, Mr Speaker.
Minister Steve Baker.
Mr Speaker, it's in everyone's interest to secure a good deal for both sides, and we're increasingly confident this can be achieved. As my right honourable friend will be aware, we continue to implement plans for all scenarios. Some delivery has already become evident, and more will become public over the coming weeks and months. As an example, I'd like to congratulate my colleagues in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy who've made progress on our preparations for exiting Euratom. The Nuclear Safeguards Bill has completed its passage through Parliament, and international agreements have been signed with the International Atomic Energy Agency and the USA, helping to ensure continuity as we leave Euratom.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to hear that prudent preparation is indeed being made for leaving without a deal. But does my honourable friend not accept that in order to provide reassurance to business and the wider public, not to mention to inform our interlocutors in Brussels, the nature and extent of that preparation should be more widely communicated?
Well, Mr Speaker, I hear the case that my right honourable friend has made, and of course I agree it's prudent for all departments to prepare for all possible outcomes. We'll continue to engage with business to reduce uncertainty wherever we can, and as I said moments ago, over the next few weeks and months, our preparations for what is an unwanted contingency will become increasingly visible to my right honourable friend and the country.
Deal or no deal, will we still be members of Europol and the Euro arrest warrant this time next year?
Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, we'll be bringing forward our plans and publishing them for the future relationship in due course.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. Question number 11, please.
Thank you,
Minister
Speaker.
Robin Walker.
As the Prime Minister set out at Mansion House and reinforced at Jodrell Bank, the UK is committed to establishing a far-reaching science and innovation pact with the EU, facilitating exchange of ideas and researchers and enabling the UK to participate in key programmes alongside EU partners.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ongoing cooperation is clearly in both ours and the EU's interest, but world-leading scientists often explain how they need to move to and fro between different countries in order to build knowledge. Will the Minister ensure that the visa system post-Brexit will enable researchers to have that flexible mobility?
Minister.
We've been very clear throughout this process that we want the UK to continue to be able to attract the brightest and the best, and to be a magnet for key talent around the world. And I think the announcement of the new start-up tech visas is a good indication of how a UK immigration policy can contribute in this space.
Thank you,
Mr Speaker. The Minister mentions that we want to attract the brightest and the best, but he missed some of what the Honourable Lady's question was about, which my constituents in the University of Bristol are very concerned about, which is the free flow of researchers and scientists around the European Union, the exchange of knowledge. They say they're already struggling. Scientific firms in my constituency say they're struggling. What further clarification can he please give?
Minister.
Well, I say to the Honourable Lady, we've reached some important agreements already with regard to the implementation agreement and the continuation of our existing membership of Horizon during the whole of that period up until the end of the MFF. What we want to do now is to secure the Science and Innovation Pact, which we've been discussing in our meetings with the Commission, and those meetings have been constructive and positive.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a trustee of the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, what assurances can he give me that the UK Government will provide at least as much funding through whatever mechanism after we leave the European Union as it does now to the universities and institutes around this country?
Well, my honourable friend asked me a very interesting question, which is probably more appropriate for a Treasury Minister to answer, but I do recognise the importance of this. The UK is stepping up its investment in R&D with our target to make sure that 2.4% of GDP is spent on R&D. That will make us one of the leading countries in the world for investment in research.
Mr Speaker, the Rheumatoid Arthritis Pathogenesis Centre of Excellence in Glasgow relies not only on the movement of people and talent, but on the movement of medical samples across borders. What will you do to ensure that medical samples can travel unfettered across the EU after Brexit?
Minister. The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, and actually having visited the University in Glasgow to talk about some of these issues, I recognise some of the world-leading research that takes place there. Of course we want to ensure that patients in the UK and the EU continue to benefit from the exchange between us, and that's why we've not only talked about this cooperation in science, we've also talked about the benefits of UK's continued participation in associate membership of the EMA.
Peter Aldous.
Number 12, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister Braverman.
The ministerial team undertakes regular engagements with the international business community, both in the UK and abroad. In addition to regular visits to Brussels, the ministerial team has undertaken 27 trips across EU member states this year. This is supported by business engagement conducted by our embassies.
Robert Courts.
It's remarkably difficult to find Peter Alders.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Mr. Peter Alders.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Minister for her reply. Over the past 50 years, considerable expertise has been built up in the North Sea energy sector, which has led to enormous global export opportunities. What steps is the government taking to ensure that this continues after we leave the EU, with particular emphasis on the emerging offshore wind sector?
The UK has been an active member of the North Seas Energy Cooperation Initiative since 2010. The aim is to explore the most cost-effective way of developing offshore grid infrastructure to exploit the considerable renewable energy resources in the North and Irish Seas. The UK brings significant experience and expertise to this cooperation. Working together with other countries through this initiative will enable us to maximise the considerable business opportunities in the emerging offshore wind sector.
And Pat McFadden.
Business is getting more nervous as it watches a government negotiating more with itself than with the European Union. Can the Minister confirm that it is government policy to ensure there are no new impediments to trade for our world-leading service industries like financial services, education, creative industries and others?
Well, I think there's considerable data which has been released recently showing an increase in confidence in various sectors, whether it's retail or services or manufacturing or construction. And I think that we have to build on that. And this is why the government is committed to reducing barriers to trade to enable our businesses, our exporters, our manufacturers, our service sector to thrive outside the European Union.
Thank you. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister referred to the offshore wind sector. When she visited my constituency in the port of Immingham and neighbouring Grimsby a couple of weeks ago, would she agree with me that the facilities therefore serving the offshore sector and the wider trade deals that could follow Brexit are greatly to the advantage of northern Lincolnshire?
I was delighted to visit the port of Immingham and Grimsby recently on his invitation, and I was very impressed by the energy estuary which is located there, and the wealth of experience and output, which is really being the energy powerhouse for our nation.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the Conservatives already arguing what promises were made or not made at the dispatch box on Tuesday night, given the Cabinet can't agree a position in the EU, and the Brexit Secretary threatens to resign every other week, what message does that send to the international business community?
Minister.
Well, let's look at the facts. We are seeing, as I said, CBI data showing an increase in output generally. We are seeing the OEC revise its forecasts upwards for this year and next. We're seeing record low unemployment throughout the country. These are signs of an economy which is confident and optimistic about the future, not the one that he describes.
Order, can I just very gently say that with ingenuity, the honourable gentleman, the member for Banff and Buchan, could shoehorn in his question about fisheries policy, which is a matter of significant interest to the international business community. He's not obliged to do so, but we can happily give him a go.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. I understand that my honourable friend, the Minister, met with the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations yesterday. Can he confirm today that he shares the ambition of the NFFO as well as that of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation that when we leave the EU we will have actual as well as legal authority over all fishing activities in UK waters out to 200 nautical miles?
We will have been
Well, my fellow Minister, Minister Baker, was very pleased to meet with the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisation yesterday, in fact, and he's very keen to keep engaging with the sector. And we've been absolutely clear that when we leave the EU, we will be leaving the common fisheries policy. Indeed, from 2020, we will be negotiating as an independent coastal state. So let me reassure him, our plans for exit from the common fisheries policy are not affected by the backstop discussions.
Thank you. Luke Pollard.
Number 13, Mr. Speaker.
E. Minister Braverman.
Oh, gosh. Mr. Speaker, my department continues to work closely with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and other departments across government to ensure that local government is prepared for the potential effects of EU exit. This work includes assessing any funding issues for local government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for that answer. Plymouth City Council's new Labour Council has established a Brexit Scrutiny Committee to look at the impacts of Brexit on vital public services. What conversations is your department having directly with local authority leaders to understand what the impacts are on vital public services that many millions of people rely on?
Well, I mean, I don't have a department, but the Minister, fortunately, does.
Well, both the Secretary of State and myself have met many local authority leaders around the country, and we are very keen to engage with them to understand what their concerns are about EU exit. What is important is that the UK will continue to participate in the 2014 to 2020 EU programmes until they close, and thereafter EU structural funding will be transferred through a UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and comments from local authorities will be very well received.
The proceedings would be incomplete if we didn't hear from the conscience of Kettering. Mr. Philip Hollowbone.
Number 15, sir.
Sorry, Speaker. The UK has reached an important agreement on citizens' rights with the EU, which is fully reciprocal. But of course, it is important to recognise that some aspects of that are the responsibility of member states rather than the European Union institutions to implement.
Mr. Philip Hollowbone.
Do the reciprocal rights which the EU is meant to have agreed extend to just the country in Europe in which UK citizens are living, or does it extend right across all 27 member states?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an important point, because we were clear that we would like to secure the onward movement rights for UK citizens living in the EU, and this is an issue which we will return to in the next phase of negotiations. But in a number of other areas, it is right that the rights are reciprocal between the UK and the EU and apply across the whole of the EU.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the Minister's comments on UK citizens living abroad, but does he not agree with me that we still need some clarity for EU citizens here in my own constituency, the David family, who've been here and worked for 20 years? Both their children were born here. One of them is entitled to a UK passport, the other one isn't. They have now had 5 different pieces of conflicting advice from UK departments about their passports and citizenship. Would the Minister be prepared to meet me to talk about this and see if we can get some clarity on it?
I'd be very happy to meet with the Honourable Lady on this issue, and I think it's clear that we are working very closely with colleagues at the Home Office to make sure that the new settled status system is clearer and easier to use than what has gone before. So I'd be very happy to meet her further to discuss this case.
Order. Topical questions. David Dukitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 1, yes.
Secretary of State Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I turn to my departmental responsibilities, can I just say it's a sombre day today, 1 year on from Grenfell, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the whole House when I say our thoughts are with those who have suffered bereavement and loss a year ago. This has been an important week in our area. It's Parliament that gave the people a decision on our membership of the EU by way of referendum, and Parliament that is carrying out their instruction. The European Union Withdrawal Bill returns to the Lords as a much studied, much debated and, I think, much better piece of legislation. It demonstrates the Government and Parliament delivering what the people voted for, and I know the members sitting in the other place will have taken note of the decisions taken and views expressed in the Commons in the last few days.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The agricultural sector in England have had the opportunity to consult on DEFRA's plans for the industry post-Brexit. As the whole UK prepares to leave the EU, does my honourable friend agree with me that farmers in Scotland would be best served if the SNP, rather than continuing their tactics of manufacturing grievance with this government, were to consult with Scottish farmers on Scotland's future agricultural policy?
Leaving the Common Agricultural Policy will deliver significant opportunities for farming. I think that's already showing in the consultation to date. He's right that there's been consultation with farming in England. The Government, however, is committed to working closely with the devolved administrations and stakeholders to deliver an approach that works for the whole of the UK, as I said earlier today, and reflects the needs and circumstances of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. That being said, I agree entirely with my honourable friend. There's a lesson that all of us involved in these proceedings have learned, bar those of the Scottish Nationalist Party, which is if you actually want to make things happen, you have to turn up and deal with the issues.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Secretary of State in his comments on Grenfell on behalf of this side of the House, and I'm sure the whole House? It's very good to see him in his place. On the back of a previous question, I've done a quick tally. I think this year he's threatened to resign more times than he's met Michel Barnier. On Tuesday, in order to avoid a defeat in this House, the Prime Minister offered a series of apparent concessions to her backbenchers. Yesterday, the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield told Sky News, after a meeting with the Prime Minister, and I quote, "We are going to get a meaningful vote on both deal and no deal. I have no doubt about that." Later, the Solicitor General told the Today programme, "I have a problem constitutionally and politically with the direction given by Parliament." Who's right?
State.
Let me say this. My responsibility is for the government, so of course I'm entirely with the Solicitor General. That follows automatically. Let me also put in front of the House what I said during that debate, which is that whatever proposal is put back to the Lords, it has to meet three criteria. Firstly, that we do not overturn the result of the referendum and don't bring that about. Secondly, that we do not undermine the negotiation that's going on with the European Union. And thirdly, we do not change the constitutional structure that served this country well for hundreds of years, that of the government negotiating and then Parliament passing its view at the end of that process.
Sir Keir Starmer.
Let me press the Secretary of State a little further, because this is a really crucial issue in the process, and we've got to get it right. Can the Secretary of State say clearly yes or no? Will the government's amendment to be published later today make clear that should the proposed Article 50 deal be voted down, it would then be for Parliament to say what happens next, not the Executive?
I'm afraid the Right Honourable Gentleman will have to wait to see the document when it's published. As he says, it will be published later today.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I think my right honourable friend is aware, in the referendum I voted to remain, and I don't think he did. The country split like us on that, and the Leave vote won. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that unity and strength is the only way forward, and that holding another second referendum would be madness, expensive madness, leading to further division and strife?
Secretary of State. Not only would it lead to further division and strife, as he puts it, it will also create an incentive for the European Union to give us the worst deal possible. And surely that must trump all other options.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most British manufacturing businesses, including businesses in my own constituency in Bath, are part of complex European supply chains. Why does he think, or why does she think, that leaving the customs union and the single market, and she does not need to repeat that it is the will of the British people, why does the government think that leaving the single market and the customs union is good for British manufacturers?
Minister Braverman.
Referendum, and contrary to the predictions at the time of the referendum, we're seeing an increase in exports outpacing imports. We're seeing an increase in manufacturing. We're seeing an increase in sales in particular sectors like the car industry. So I think we've got to build on those successes. Leaving the customs union will enable us to develop an independent trade policy beyond the EU and with other countries, and leaving the single market will give us power and control over our rules and regulations.
Craig Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that as the UK will be able to sign free trade agreements during the implementation period, we will have taken control of our trade and so can enjoy all of the benefits this offers from March 2019?
My honourable friend makes a good point. The green section of the withdrawal agreement includes an express indication that during the implementation period, we will, for the first time in 40 years, have the freedom to negotiate, sign and ratify trade agreements with third countries, opening our markets for British manufacturers, exporters and businesses, and a surefire way of generating growth, jobs and prosperity.
Aaron Smith.
Mr. Speaker, in response to my previous question, I think the Minister said there would be no additional government resources for the Northern Ireland Police Force. Can he confirm that any additional resources for any contingency would be met from within their existing budget?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady may have misheard me, because I said there would be no resources spent on going against our commitments on the border. I think that's the point I was making. And so, obviously, resources allocated by the government is really a question for the Treasury and Northern Ireland Office.
Pow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that coming up with a plan soon to enable seasonal or short-term labour from the EU or the wider world in the form of, say, a seasonal agricultural or season workers visa would actually be really helpful to business, and we don't necessarily need to keep them waiting till we actually exit the EU, because they could then plan?
Mr. Speaker, we've been engaging with businesses up and down the country to build a strong understanding of the challenges and opportunities that Brexit brings, and particularly in relation to immigration, and that will help us to design a new immigration system that ensures employers have access to the skills they need. I'm happy to tell my honourable friend that I discussed her proposal with the Minister of State for Immigration very recently. Government is alive to her arguments, and we will continue to consider them as we deliberate.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Yeah. What is there to stop the government repeating its unilateral rewriting of the Constitution and devolution power grab in other Brexit-related legislation?
Well, I'm very glad that we have legislation now that ensures that the devolution system is respected, and that's been recognised by the devolved government in Wales, and I still think there's an opportunity for the devolved government of the devolved Parliament in Scotland to come forward and recognise that fact.
Thank you.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that ending freedom of movement will at long last give control over who can come to this country and allow us to then create an immigration system that works for science without limitless immigration from the EU?
Minister Walker, friend who is a great champion of science in the UK, makes a very important point. We want to continue to attract the brightest and the best to the UK, particularly those looking to work in our world-leading science and innovation sector. And as I said earlier, the announcement of the new start-up visas, I think, is an important step in showing that a UK immigration policy can do that.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State directly? Does he think he and his team have got the right level of competencies in order to conduct these difficult negotiations? And isn't it about time he thought very carefully at bringing in some new talent? And could I suggest perhaps David Miliband, Gordon Brown, and even the former Chancellor Exchequer? They might actually help him do a job that needs attention to detail and real competence.
The attention to detail that delivered the financial crisis of 2008 is precisely what we don't want.
Eddie Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, the people of Willenhall and Bloxwich voted enthusiastically and overwhelmingly to exit the EU. Can the Minister assure them that they'll get a Brexit deal they recognise as Brexit?
Mr. Speaker, I can give him that assurance. We are determined to take back control of our laws, our borders, our trade policy, and we will make sure that we go forward as a normal, independent country where people know that it's this Parliament that governs their lives.
Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the government are so confident of achieving this wonderful trade deal they keep talking about with the EU, with the single market and the customs union, why are they so frightened to put that deal to the public to see if that's the kind of Brexit they expected?
Secretary of State.
The honourable gentleman really must learn to pay attention during these questions. The simple truth is that creating such an incentive for the European Union will actually be the one thing which undermines the negotiation.
Ballabone.
Any divorce, the assets are divided, including the £39 billion divorce bill. From the day we joined in 1973 to the day we leave, we will have given £250 billion in today's money to this organisation. What proportion of the assets are we going to get back?
Well,
Minister Baker.
First of all, I'd like to refute the idea that this is a divorce. I prefer to think that we're loving siblings who have decided to grow up and move out into the house next door. But what I would say to him is that what we have done is reach a fair financial settlement, and I'm pleased that we have.
Gavin Robinson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will understand that the natural consequence of proceedings on Tuesday was that amendments that considered Northern Ireland, the devolved regions and the border didn't get the thoughtful or considered reflection that they should. Can I ask the Secretary of State, will he use his influence, should those amendments come back to this House again, that any programme motion will be framed in such a way that such thoughtful and considered reflections can be made in this House during our proceedings.
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman raises a good point. Of course, we did spend quite a lot of time in the earlier stages of the bill discussing some of these issues, and I think the amendment that it was eventually passed reflected some of that debate, as well as the very good debate in the Lords. But of course, these are very important issues, and we will look carefully at programme motions for any further stages.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The remarks by the outgoing head of the CBI yesterday are very serious and need to be taken in that context. Does the government have any plans to provide a very detailed response to those remarks, given the importance of them to the auto industry and many other industries?
Secretary of State.
I thank my old friend for that question. We take all these remarks from business and business leaders very seriously. We have to make an assessment as to what the best interest of the whole country is, and balance, for example, with respect to customs union, the interests of existing companies and companies who may make the most of opportunities in the rest of the world when we get freedom from the common commercial policy. But in direct answer to the end of his question, we will of course be publishing a white paper in the near future, and it will be addressed in that white paper.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State confirm that any separate regulatory alignment deal for Northern Ireland will be available to Scotland?
As we said in our proposal to the European Union, the backstop proposal was for the whole of the United Kingdom, and everything else will be for the whole United Kingdom, with minor variations which currently exist in Northern Ireland.
Deirdre Brock.
Mr. Speaker, would the Secretary of State join me in appreciating the irony inherent in the news today that even businesses set up by members of his own party are announcing their intention to move business to Ireland and are warning their investors of the uncertainties of Brexit?
Well, let's also focus on the recent investment decisions that we're also hearing. We've got record numbers of FDI projects in the UK. We've just heard that Amazon is going to be investing more money to create 2,000 or so new jobs in the UK. Multinational, international, global companies in pioneering sectors are choosing the UK after our decision to leave the European Union to build their businesses and grow jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Dutch government is offering advice on Brexit to Dutch businesses. The Irish government is offering grants to Irish businesses affected by Brexit. But in the absence of anything from this government, the North East Chamber of Commerce has produced a checklist. Now, the Secretary of State seems to think it's unreasonable for businesses to demand greater clarity or progress, but could he at least offer them some advice?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've done a huge amount to engage with business, and as I said in earlier questions, as we go forward in the next few weeks and months, we will reveal more of our plans, and of course, as we do that, we will engage in more detail with businesses right across the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government has long used the excuse of being in the EU as cover for not implementing the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. Will the government make it its policy to adopt this after we leave the EU?
Minister Walker.
The lady raised this point before in our questions, and as you will appreciate, it's not necessarily a question for this department, but she points to an area in which, of course, the UK may have greater flexibility in the future. That's something that I think we should welcome.
Patrick Grady.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State listed a series of conventions and mandates that he wants to see respected in the Brexit process. I notice he didn't mention the mandate of the 62% of people in Scotland who voted to remain, and the 20-year-old Sewell Convention that determines relationships between this place and the government in Scotland. Does he seriously think that ripping up the 20-year-old devolution settlement on this island is a price worth paying for a hard Tory Brexit?
Minister.
Well, as I've already said, we're absolutely committed to the devolution settlement. The arrangements that we've reached respect that devolution settlement. And I think in a week that we've seen a lot of debate about meaningful votes, it's a shame that the SNP colluded in a series of meaningless votes, voting 3 times on the same thing twice, which ate into the time available to debate these issues.
Thank you. Order.